The wind had a voice in this part of the world, a low, keening cry that scoured the land of anything soft. It stripped the pines of their weakest needles and polished the granite faces of the mountains until they shone with a cold, hard light. The air smelled of rust and ice, of old neglect. It was a place that had forgotten the color green. Through this unforgiving landscape, a man moved with a quiet economy of motion. Elias. He didn't rush. Never did. His steps were as deliberate as the turning of the seasons, his presence a dark, solid shape against the endless white. His world was one of silence, a state he had cultivated over long years until it was as much a part of him as the calluses on his hands. He was tracking a wounded buck, following a scant trail of crimson on the snow, when another sound broke through the wind's monopoly. It was thin and desperate, almost lost in the gale. Not an animal. He changed course without hesitation, his worn boot sinking into deep drifts, his eyes scanning the hollows between the skeletal aspen trees. He found her in a shallow depression, a place where the wind had swept the snow away to reveal the frozen earth. She was a ruin of a woman, her face a mask of purple and blue, her dark hair matted with blood and ice. Beside her, nestled in the folds of her thin cloak, were two impossibly small bundles. The sound came again. A weak, mewling cry. Twins. He knelt, his movement slow, gentle, so as not to startle what little life was left. Her eyes, or what he could see of them through the swelling, fluttered open. Fear, pure and primal, flared within them. He said nothing. Words were clumsy tools, and this moment required a surgeon's care. He simply reached out and drew the cloak more tightly around the infants, his large, rough hand a strange and sudden shield against the world's cruelty. He saw the marks on her, the story written in bruises. It was a familiar story in the hard lands beyond his solitude. A widow. And daughters, not sons. A crime in the eyes of brutish men. He gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of grain, a fragile collection of bones and pain. He held her close, her head lolling against his chest, and started the long walk home, the two tiny lives bundled safely against his warmth, their cries now muffled into faint, rhythmic protests. The world was still a brutal place, but for now, their world was the steady beat of his heart. When Lena's consciousness returned, it came in pieces. First, warmth. A deep, penetrating heat that seemed to be drawing the ache from her bones. It was so profound, so alien, that for a moment she thought she had died and this was some strange, fiery purgatory. Then came the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. The scratch of a wool blanket against her cheek. She forced her swollen eyelids open. The world was a blur of soft, flickering light. She was inside, in a small, square room made of rough-hewn logs. A fire danced in a stone hearth, its light throwing long, gentle shadows on the walls. She was lying on a pallet of furs near the flames. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. The babies. She tried to sit up, a gasp of pain catching in her throat as her bruised ribs screamed. A hand, large and steady, pressed gently on her shoulder. Easy, a voice said. It was low and raspy, like stones grinding together, yet it held no menace. She looked up and saw him. The man from the snow. He was sitting on a small stool near the fire, watching her. His face was weathered, carved with lines of hardship and solitude, but his eyes were clear and calm. He gestured with his head towards the other side of the hearth. There, in a crudely made cradle, lay her daughters, swaddled tightly, sleeping in the fire's glow. Relief washed over her so powerfully it left her weak. He had brought them all. He had not left them behind. He held out a wooden bowl filled with steaming broth. She stared at it, then at him, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. No one had shown her kindness without a price. Especially not a man. Drink, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't force it on her, just held it out, an offering. Hesitantly, she reached with a trembling hand. Her fingers brushed his, and she flinched, but he did not react. He simply steadied the bowl for her as she drank. It was a long time before she could speak, her throat raw. Her first word came out as a broken whisper. Why? He took the empty bowl from her, his gaze moving from her battered face to the sleeping children and back again. He considered the question for a long moment, the silence in the cabin broken only by the crackle of the fire. He didn't offer a complicated explanation. He didn't speak of pity or duty. He just gave her the simple, unvarnished truth. The wind was cold. Days bled into weeks. The world outside remained a maelstrom of snow and wind, a fortress of winter that kept the past at bay. Inside the small cabin, a fragile rhythm began to take shape, governed by the needs of the infants and the quiet cadence of their protector. Elias was a creature of routine. He rose before the sun, stoked the fire until it blazed, and then disappeared into the white wilderness, returning hours later with firewood or fresh game. He never spoke of where he went or what he did. His actions were his language. He would leave a skinned rabbit on the rough-hewn table, a bowl of rendered fat for her to use on her cracked lips, a fresh pile of soft moss to serve as swaddling. He moved around the small space with an innate awareness of her fear, never making a sudden move, never crowding her. He was a constant, silent presence, as reliable and unobtrusive as the stone walls of the cabin itself. Lena's healing was as slow as the winter thaw. Her body mended, the bruises fading from violent purple to a sickly yellow-green and then vanishing altogether, leaving behind only the ghosts of memory. Her spirit, however, remained in pieces. She focused all her energy on her daughters, whom she named Anya and Ilara. They were her anchors in a sea of trauma. She fed them, cleaned them, and held them for hours, whispering stories of a kinder world she wasn't sure existed. She watched Elias. She saw the way his large, clumsy-looking hands could expertly stitch a tear in a leather pouch, the gentleness with which he added wood to the fire so as not to wake the babies. He never asked for thanks. He never asked for anything. One evening, as he sat cleaning his knife by the fire, she finally found her voice again, stronger this time. "What is your name?" she asked, the words feeling heavy and strange in the quiet air. He didn't look up from his task, but the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel paused. "Elias," he said. He resumed his work. The conversation was over. But it was a start. It was a name to attach to the quiet strength that had become her shield. It was the first solid thing she had to hold onto in this strange new life. Spring arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was in the sound of water dripping from the eaves, a gentle percussion that replaced the howl of the wind. It was in the slivers of pale sunlight that stretched longer across the wooden floor each afternoon. The world was softening, and with it, so was Lena. The oppressive weight of fear began to lift, replaced by a tentative curiosity. She started to explore the confines of her sanctuary, running her fingers over the axe marks in the log walls, examining the neat rows of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. She began to contribute in small ways. When he returned from the woods, he would find the stew simmering, his spare tunic mended with her small, neat stitches. She was reclaiming pieces of herself, one quiet act at a time. One afternoon, while Elias was out, she held Anya and Ilara close to the fire and began to hum. It was an old lullaby, a melody her own mother had sung to her. The tune was fragile at first, but it grew stronger, filling the cabin with a sound it had likely never known before, a sound of gentle, hopeful love. Elias heard it as he approached the cabin. He stopped by the woodpile, listening, the axe held forgotten in his hand. The sound was so foreign, so beautiful, it seemed to catch the light and shimmer in the cold air. He did not enter right away. He waited until the lullaby was finished, feeling an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a feeling of something ancient and frozen inside him beginning to crack. Later that night, after she and the babies were asleep, he sat by the hearth. He took a small block of pine from his pocket and his sharpest knife. For hours, he worked, the only sound the soft shearing of wood. The next morning, when Lena awoke, she saw it sitting on the edge of the cradle. It was a tiny wooden bird, its wings half spread as if about to take flight. The carving was crude, the work of a man unaccustomed to delicate things, but it was rendered with an unmistakable tenderness. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the rough wings. It was not a necessity. It was not for survival. It was a gift. It was a word spoken in his silent language, a word she was beginning to understand. The peace was a fragile thing, a thin sheet of ice over a dark, deep lake. They had existed in their bubble for months, a pocket of stillness carved out of the wilderness. But the world outside had not forgotten her. The thaw that brought life back to the mountains also opened the paths for men. He arrived on a day when the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The name of her torment was Jonas. He was her dead husband's brother, a man whose heart was a cold, hard stone of resentment and entitlement. He did not approach the cabin with caution. He crashed through the trees on a sweat-lathered horse, his voice a belligerent roar that shattered the quiet. "Lena! I know you're in there, you worthless wench. Hiding with my property." Lena was outside, hanging washed swaddling on a line Elias had strung between two pines. At the sound of that voice, all the warmth of the sun vanished. The air grew thin and cold. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. Every healed part of her screamed in memory of his fists. She froze, a deer caught in the hunter's sight, her hands dropping to her sides like stones. The cabin door creaked open. Elias stepped out, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. He held no weapon. His stance was not aggressive, but it was immovable. He was a mountain, a wall of silent, weathered certainty. Jonas reined his horse in hard, churning the soft earth. His eyes, small and cruel, swept over Lena with disgust, then landed on Elias. A sneer twisted his lips. "So this is the whelp you ran to? What's he got that you need, eh? Another man to warm your bed now that you've failed to give my brother a son." He spat on the ground. "Those two mewling brats are a curse on our name. But you still have your uses. You belong to our family. You're coming back with me." Alina could not breathe. The past had reached for her, its claws sharp and ready to drag her back into the dark. But then Elias moved. He took one slow step forward, his shadow falling over her, shielding her. Jonas slid from his horse, his hand resting on the hilt of a long knife at his belt. He was shorter than Elias, but broader, built of brutish muscle and swaggering confidence. He saw only an old man living in a shack, an obstacle to be removed. "Get out of my way, old man," Jonas snarled, his voice thick with contempt. "This is family business. It has nothing to do with you." Elias's gaze did not waver. It was fixed on Jonas, steady and unnervingly calm. His voice, when it came, was as quiet as it had been for the past months, yet it carried across the clearing with the weight of iron. "She is not property." The simplicity of the statement infuriated Jonas. He was a man who understood only loudness, violence, and ownership. This quiet defiance was an insult. "She is my brother's widow. By law and tradition, she belongs to us. Her debt must be paid. She owes our line a son, not these." Mistakes. He gestured dismissively toward the cabin, where Anya and Elara were sleeping, unaware of the poison that had seeped into their sanctuary. Lena, standing behind Elias, felt a surge of something other than fear. It was a hot, white rage. They were not mistakes. They were her heart. They were everything. The sight of Elias standing before her, an unbreachable wall, gave that rage a place to burn. Elias took another deliberate step. The space between the two men crackled with tension. "She owes nothing," Elias said, his voice dropping even lower. "She is home." The word hung in the air, simple and profound. Home. Not his home. Not a place. A state of being. It was a declaration more powerful than any threat. Jonas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Home? This pigsty? You're pathetic. I'm taking what is mine." He finally drew his knife, its blade catching the bright sun. He was done with words. He lunged, not at Elias, but to the side, trying to get past him to grab Lena. The movement was fast, but Elias was faster. He did not meet the violence with equal fury. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, intercepting Jonas's lunge, his body a solid, unyielding barrier. The struggle was brief and brutal, a clash of two opposing forces. Jonas was fueled by rage and entitlement, his movements clumsy and furious. Elias moved with a grim, efficient purpose, his strength born of a lifetime of hard labor and solitude. He did not strike a blow. He absorbed, deflected, and controlled. He caught Jonas's knife hand, his grip like a vice. For a moment they were locked together, a tableau of raw conflict. Jonas roared in frustration, trying to bring his weight to bear, but it was like trying to move a deeply rooted oak. With a powerful twist, Elias wrenched the knife from his grasp. The blade spun through the air and embedded itself deep in a nearby pine tree, quivering. Disarmed and enraged, Jonas threw a wild punch. Elias turned with the blow, letting most of its force glance off his shoulder, but the impact still sent a jarring shock through him. He grunted, a rare sound of pain, but his feet did not move. He held his ground. Seeing his violence was useless against this silent wall of a man, Jonas stumbled back, his chest heaving. His face was a mask of hatred and humiliation. He was beaten, but not defeated. The cruelty in him simply found a new path. "Fine," he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "Keep her. Keep the useless baggage. But this isn't over. I'll be back, old man. I'll come back with my cousins, and we'll burn this shack to the ground with all of you inside. You can't hide her forever." He scrambled back onto his horse, kicked its ribs viciously, and galloped away, leaving a trail of ugly threats hanging in the poisoned air. Silence descended once more, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavy, broken. The sanctuary had been breached. The ice was shattered. Lena looked at Elias, at the darkening bruise on his shoulder, at the grim line of his jaw. The hope that had bloomed in her heart withered. He had defended her, but at what cost? He was one man. Jonas had a family, a clan of men just like him. They would be overwhelmed. "He will do it," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He will come back and destroy everything. You have to make me leave." She expected him to nod, to agree. It was the logical thing to do. She was a danger to him. The quiet life he had built was now in jeopardy because of her. She was a curse, just as Jonas had said. Elias turned to face her fully. He looked at her, his gaze taking in the renewed fear in her eyes, the tremble in her hands. He looked past her, to the doorway of the cabin, the simple space that had become their entire world. He saw the cradle, the fire, the small wooden bird. He had found a life here he didn't know he was missing. Loneliness had been a garment he had worn for so long he'd forgotten its weight until she and her children had arrived and, in their fragility, lifted it from his shoulders. He had tasted peace, and he would not surrender it to a brute like Jonas. His expression was impossible to read, a landscape carved by a private history of sorrow. Lena's heart sank. This was it. This was the end of the dream. He would tell her to go, to take her daughters and run, to disappear back into the wilderness. He would do it for his own safety, and she could not blame him. He had already done more than any person had a right to ask. He finally spoke, and his words struck her like a physical blow, confirming her worst fear. "You're right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're not staying here." The words hung between them, a final judgment. It was over. The warmth, the safety, the impossible hope, all gone. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and bitter. She choked back a sob and nodded, unable to speak. She would gather her daughters. She would thank him, though no words could ever be enough. And then she would walk away, back into the cold. But he wasn't finished. He took a step closer, and for the first time, he reached out and gently touched her arm, his calloused thumb stroking her skin. It was a gesture of such profound reassurance that it stopped her breath. "We're not staying here," he repeated, and this time, the meaning was transformed. A world of difference lay in that single, added word. "We. This place is known now," he continued, his eyes holding hers. He was right about one thing. He will come back. So we will leave. We'll find another valley. A better one. A place they will never find. Together, it was not a rejection. It was a vow. It was the most profound commitment she had ever known, spoken in the simple, declarative language of his soul. He wasn't sending her away. He was binding their lives together. The departure was not a frantic escape. It was a quiet, deliberate act of creation. They were not fleeing a home, they were taking their home with them. Inside the cabin, they worked in tandem, a silent, efficient team. Lena gathered the few precious things they possessed, the warm blankets, the remaining dried food, the small wooden bird which she tucked safely into Ilara's swaddling. Elias prepared for the journey, packing smoked meat, a flint and steel, and his sharpest axe. He moved with a sense of purpose that calmed the frantic beating of Lena's heart. He was not afraid. He was preparing. He was providing. He was protecting. He secured Anya to his own back in a sling he fashioned from a spare hide, the baby's soft cheek resting against the coarse wool of his tunic. Lena bundled Ilara and held her close to her chest. As the first pale light of dawn painted the eastern sky, they stood in the doorway of the cabin one last time. The fire in the hearth still burned brightly, a beacon of warmth they would leave behind. It had been their anchor, the heart of their sanctuary. But they didn't need it anymore. The fire was inside them now, a shared flame of resilience and devotion. Elias looked at Lena, a silent question in his eyes. "Ready?" She met his gaze and nodded, a small, certain smile touching her lips for the first time since Jonas's arrival. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unwavering trust. They stepped out into the crisp morning air and didn't look back. They walked away from the lonely shack, away from the tainted peace, and set their faces toward the jagged peaks of the western mountains. The landscape that had once seemed so hostile and empty now looked different. It was vast, yes, but it was also full of possibility. It was a blank page on which they could write a new story. They walked side by side, a man, a woman, and 2 children, a tiny, determined family against the immense backdrop of the wilderness. Their journey was far from over, but their solitude was. They were no longer 2 lonely souls who had found a temporary shelter. They were a unit, moving forward together, their path illuminated by the hopeful light of a new day. Their new home was a valley nestled so deep in the mountain range it felt like the world's secret. A clear, cold river cut through a meadow that bloomed with wildflowers in the summer, and the trees were ancient and tall, their branches a dense canopy that promised shelter and seclusion. Here, they built a new life, not on a foundation of fear and survival, but on one of choice and love. The cabin Elias constructed was larger than the last, with a window that faced the sunrise and a porch where Lena could sit and sing to the girls as they grew. The silence between them was no longer a void to be navigated but a shared space of comfort, rich with unspoken understanding. It was a language of its own, spoken in the way he'd leave a perfect, ripened berry on the windowsill for her, or the way she'd place her hand on his back for a fleeting moment as he passed. The girls, Anya and Ilara, grew from infants into toddlers, their laughter the new, constant music of the valley. They had their mother's dark, curious eyes and their protector's steady, fearless spirit. They knew nothing of the cruelty of the world they had left behind. Their world was the smell of pine, the warmth of the hearth, the solid presence of Elias, and the gentle songs of their mother. Home was not a place on a map. It was the safety in his gaze. It was the strength in her resilience. It was the future they saw reflected in their daughter's eyes. One evening, watching Elias teach a small, giggling Anya how to skip stones across the river, Lena finally understood. He hadn't just saved her from the snow. He had saved her from a life where she was considered less than nothing. He had looked at her, broken and discarded, and seen not a burden, but a person worthy of a home. He had taken her nothing and made it everything. What is a home? Is it the walls that surround you, or the feeling of safety that allows you to finally breathe? We are often told that family is defined by blood, but perhaps its truest definition is found in the people who choose to stand between us and the cold wind, who offer us warmth not because they have to, but simply because they can. This story is about the quiet strength it takes to build a sanctuary and the courage it takes to accept one. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful words are not shouted from the rooftops but are spoken in gentle actions and unwavering presence. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found a home in an unexpected place or with an unexpected person? Share your story with our community and let's celebrate the quiet protectors and resilient survivors all around us. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our shared narrative.